Hello and welcome. Go. Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Oppenheimer, in case you don't know me. And I'm here with the rest of the members of the ScabNet group from the USB Broadly Scab Initiative. Here with us is Amber, Bia, and Bhavit, which all helped organize this event. We're all very excited to have you here today, as well as to have Monica Lewandowski who's very generous to donate some of her time today to putting together this presentation. So the idea behind this webinar today was to provide everybody with some expert, tips for how to improve your ability to make professional scientific posters. Now, people here who are fellow FHB scab people know, like they may be planning on attending a forum coming up in December. So this will be helpful to have people think in advance of like what kind of strategies they could put into their own posters to present this upcoming December. So to give this presentation here today, we have Monica Lewandowski, who is a teaching faculty member in the Department of Plant Pathology at Ohio State, where she is an undergraduate advisor and graduate program coordinator. She teaches a class at Ohio State that leads students through the development of a research topic and poster presentation, and can offer some tips here for communicating your science. She is originally from Central California and earned her bachelor's and master's from California State University, Fresno, and also her PhD in plant biology from University of California, Riverside. Prior to Ohio State, she worked in outreach and education at the University of Florida's Citrus Research and Education Center. So thank you again, Monica, for being here. I'm going to hand over this presentation to you in just 1 second, but first, just to go over a couple ground rules. Monica, in her presentation, she has certain slides and stopping points to give everybody the opportunity here to ask any questions that come up during her presentation. So if you wouldn't mind everybody except for Monica to mute your mics and save your questions for these stopping periods. You can ask them in the chat. You can send these questions in the chat to me or Amber, or the general group as well. Or you can also ask them in person by raising your hand. So with that, I will now hand it over to Monica. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Peter. This is a presentation covering tips for creating a scientific poster. And as Peter mentioned, the timing is very good for our upcoming Fusarium Head Blight Forum in Cincinnati, Ohio. So we hope you'll be able to join us in Ohio. But regardless, these presentation tips can apply to any scientific poster or even a presentation. And so as you create your poster, you will work with your research team or your advisor, supervisor, and your colleagues for the actual content. But hopefully these tips will help you organize the material. And as you get feedback, oftentimes you get more and more things to add, your poster, more and more content. And so it can be challenging to navigate all of that and still, keep your poster within a manageable size. And it's definitely a challenge. But I do find that I like working on posters and finding ways to communicate it. It's definitely worth the effort. It's a great learning experience. And then, of course, the poster forum itself is great networking. So I will have some stopping points here for questions and, welcome your input. And I'll just start off by saying or pointing out that your poster is not a research article. And so even though you might start writing, introduction, your figures, your discussion, you're going to have to rethink the format and how you present it on a large size piece of paper. You'll want to make it easy to skim and then encourage conversations and questions at a poster forum. So keep that in mind as you start to put together your information. So for today, we'll touch briefly on these important points about establishing your core message and some poster essentials. Then we'll probably spend most of the time on tips for readability and design and communicating data. Then we'll wrap up with important points about gathering feedback and then coming back to your core message. So if that sounds good, we'll continue on with number one, and that is establishing your core message. So that's very important. Make sure it's obvious to your reader. It'll be obvious to you, but it may not be obvious to someone new. And then think about this. Everything on your poster should support your core message. And that core message might be in your title. Now, if you don't do that, if you have a lot of information that starts to go off here or there on a tangent, your poster to a visitor or reader is going to seem like it's all over the place. And maybe you've been to seen a seminar that seems kind of like that. So it is important to make it obvious and then always keep supporting that core message. It can be a narrow in scope or broad in scope. But that's something you'll want to decide and work with your research team, your advisor. And then just a word about the poster essentials. And that just means making sure you know the conference poster guidelines, the size, the deadlines. ScabUSA.org has a good handout or guide for making posters in PowerPoint and Google Slides. Important. So when you do start working on a poster on your computer, check the size, for example, in a PowerPoint, because that default opens up to a screen size. There's a way to custom size it to the size of the poster for the actual printing of the poster. And then I'll point out that your university or organization will probably have a poster template that's important for consistency and for branding. And there's a lot of research behind that consistency in the look. So I do recommend using the template and then don't modify the template. And I say much because even I've sometimes modified the template, the size just a little bit, but you want to especially keep the logo correct and the spacing and location of any logos and things like that. And marketing communications will have a lot of guidelines on that. So it is important to follow. So that's all I'll note about poster essentials. If you have any questions, you can pop them into the chat or unmute your mic and ask them before we go on to tips for readability and design.
Okay, so.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but I had a question. Maybe you might talk about this later, but you talked about like how like poster presentations are really great opportunities to network with a lot of like-minded researchers. I've never considered doing this myself, but like would it be right maybe like is there a way to maybe include like a QR code that can maybe like be a link to like your LinkedIn profile or something like that? I never thought about that like way to.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen that before. People incorporating that. I see that a little bit more and more, and that's great, especially if you're a student or postdoc, or want to make sure colleagues can link to you. People have got their phones, and then they'll just use it on their phone, and then they've got it. So that's a great idea for incorporating that.
Okay, thanks, man. I can consider doing
Yeah,
that.
great ideas. All right, so we'll go on to some tips, get into some tips for readability and design. Okay, just a reminder that your poster is not a research article, and then you do want to make it easy to skim. I mean, if you've been to a poster forum, you know it's a large room of posters and you're standing and you have limited time often to read the poster, but it's just easier to skim with some tips. And the number one tip is just using adequate white space. And there's a lot of research about behind readability and why white space is important. And on these slides, I've got links and they'll be made available to you where you can find and read more information on white space. But what I mean by white space is that it just makes the poster easier to read. And so that's white space in the margins, the length of the paragraphs, space between lines, space around the figures. And so here in this example, side by side, something very crowded, lots of text, and then adding some white space. And so it's easier to read. Now, it does have less text, less room for text. So you're going to have to think about that and what do you edit out? And so that's where the importance of thinking back to your core message and what do you really need to support that core message. And why is it important? Well, on this infographic, it's an infographic about infographics. It's only 20% of text is remembered. 90% of info is transmitted to the brain visually, and color images increase willingness to read by 80%. So this is really important in encouraging people to come visit and read your poster. And so these are some things we want to think and keep in mind as we go through and develop the poster. So here's an example. This is a block of text. So if you have in your poster or even in your writing a block of text, there are some things you can do without even editing or changing any of the words to make the poster easier to read. And that's by adding white space, like line breaks, paragraph breaks. So for example, here, I haven't changed any of the text. I've just added some line breaks, paragraph breaks. And then if you see here, this is a little bit of a longer paragraph, but is kind of a list of things. So maybe you can think about bulletizing that or using bullet points for that. But comparing the top to the bottom, this is easier to read, easier to skim. So we've talked about the need to maybe edit where necessary, cut out some words to give you more white space. And this is, again, the same message, but I've edited it down and then use bold for a heading, a subheading, and then things underneath it so people can understand the hierarchy of information. What's the main message, what goes under it, what is supporting it. And then that is easier to skim. So as you're editing, what you edit, how you edit, just go back and think of your core message. So here's some examples. This is from Animate Your Science. They have some good communication tips. This is some text with supporting figures or images. Not a lot of text, and it's got that interesting visual. And so if you're going to draw this out, pencil this out, it looks something like this. Your poster title up at the top, it's got some kind of eye-catching graphic, and that helps draw people into your poster to take a second look and say, what is that? And then once you get them in, then they can follow and look at your poster more. I've got some text, but not a lot, and then some figures here. So that's one way in a poster template to convey your information. We're often seeing more posters like this where that core message is center stage here, right here in the middle, and then the supporting information is off to the sides, maybe smaller, or maybe links to more information there. So if this is can be challenging, but a good way to think about what is your main message and what do I need to support it. Now, if you want to go maybe more hybrid and go back to adding a little bit more information, your figures, more data, you can go do something like this example we had on Animate Your Science. But it is also possible to add more text and visuals if you really need to. This is also from Animate Your Science, and it's got that eye-catching graphic here. But more text, more figures, but they're nicely laid out. It's a nice, clean layout. It's organized into sections, and it's more readable in that way. Now, the eye-catching graphic does serve to help people draw people into your poster. But if you want to think of a graphic that might be more purposeful, you can think about how to add an image or a graphic that helps illustrate your research. And so for this is an example here. So for example, if you want to incorporate a diagram or photos of leaves, underground soil, then you could put the soil information here in the bottom, the air information up here, leaves and information up there. So this takes a little bit more time, I think, and more thought, but it can be very effective. You don't have to be an artist. You can use stock images or photographs that you've taken, or look for diagrams or graphics that are available online. And the graphic may not need to be as large as this one, but this is an example. So more tips for readability. The font size is very important. If it's too small, people will notice and it'd be harder to read. And so these are some suggestions. If you Google it, you'll find a range of suggestions. This is, I'll just point out the main text 24 point or larger. That's a good suggestion. The smaller you get, then that means you're putting more and more text, and maybe you're making it a little bit hard to read. So remember, this is for readability. And then some other tips is organizing the content into sections. And we saw how that can make your poster look very nice and neat with a good layout. Like this one, the sections are clear. It's got the headings, boxes. They've used boxes. You can also use lines like vertical or horizontal lines to delineate your sections, and that adds visual interest, but it importantly helps guide the reader as to what they're looking at, what goes with what. And then just some more tips. We talked about color being really important for readability. The ideal poster color palette is around 3 colors, and that can also include some shades of the same colors. But if you have too many colors or colors that are clashing, it could actually be more distracting. Your university or your organization may actually have a color palette, a recommended color palette, and often that can be found in communications or marketing units or on their websites. And so using a color palette can be helpful because there's a lot of research and behind the readability and psychology of color. So you want to use that to your advantage. And then some other tips for saving space. And if you've got tips for saving space, you can add them to your chat, your favorite tips for saving space while maintaining white space and not making margins or font size smaller and smaller, or figures smaller and smaller. But if you go through and take the time to edit both the data and the images you're going to use and your poster word count, that'll actually increase readability. So less is more. And then if you've got things that you think some people may really benefit from or want to know, like your detailed methods, perhaps you can link to a Google Docs or something like that where you can get the details, provide a QR code to a site where you've got that uploaded and other people can access. You can even think about putting your full literature cited on there, because I know that does take up space, or any other data that didn't quite make it onto the poster, other information there. All right, so if you do have some other tips, I'm sure we'd be glad to hear them for saving space, because that's always a challenge. It may come down to, however, uh, doing some good edits there. All right, so any questions on just the formatting and readability? And you can always put them in the chat.
I had one question because I'm working on my poster right now for the Scab forum, and I have a lot of kind of confusing figures, and I've been sort of like, in order to I kind of feel like when I make my poster, I have to have it like be able to stand on its own without me being there to kind of explain it. And so I make very kind of long figure captions, but would it be okay for me rather to actually like have like a long figure caption for me just to like not have any caption whatsoever, and just because I assume that I'm going to be there and I'll be explaining it to anybody in any way, I could save space by getting rid of that caption, like doesn't have to stand on its own without me there.
Um, I I probably go somewhere in between and put some sort of caption, because that's helpful, even if someone is standing there and then you don't have to explain it all. Maybe it's an edited caption, so it's not a long detailed caption, but it tells and conveys the main message.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question though, because that is our what we're always wanting to do is put, that long detailed explanation. And that's a good point too. Figures, tables, things like that should stand on their own, whether it's in a poster or a paper. And so someone should be able to understand that by reading the data. It should be labeled correctly, adequately, and then have a explanation or a caption there, maybe associated with the other parts of the poster. That's a good
So,
question.
yeah, so I have a doubt. So we have seen different templates, and the templates you showed were totally different from each other. So what I assume from this, that our poster can be in any way, just we need to show our research, right? Like it can be any way because yeah, it should not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, if you want to work with others, these are just some a variety of ways, and so you may have, colleagues or others that might feel like you need to put more information on it. Some might, some people might feel like some of the real minimal style is not enough, or kind of radical, or you want to share more information. So those are examples, but as far as I the poster, we are seeing more of a trend for minimalist, less data, less text, I should say, less text, and more of the simple communication for a poster. And we'll go over some more examples of what people are doing too, or what organizations are doing too. So,
Mhm.
it's just, yeah,
Yeah.
communication.
So I was thinking that the scientific poster consists of objectives, discussions, results, but the one we saw with the tree and the air, soil, that doesn't consist of that thing. So is it fine to work with this kind of poster?
Yeah, that was more of an infographic. So it wasn't so much a research study. So you might then instead around, say, the tree, the diagram of a plan, put that your introduction, your,
Okay.
methods, your objectives, and things like that, and then use the diagram as in association with your data, your
Mm-hmm.
figures, and things like that.
Got
Yeah.
it.
So
Thank you.
yeah, it's going to be highly dependent on your actual research and what you're sharing in your audience too.
Yeah. Like maybe it could be like a key graph that you wanted to like emphasize, like that you think is really going to impress people, maybe, and you could have it like revolve around like that finding, or maybe if it, or maybe if you're, for example, doing like a population genetics research project, it could be like a map showing like immigration and emigration of different, isolates, or or something like that. Like I wonder, that could be like a cool idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, see that, like that thing,
Yeah.
ideas
Nice.
are churning in people's mind.
Thanks.
But I have a question. But do you think it will be still a better idea to go with like having introduction, material methods, results, or make it like a general? Like, don't follow by that. Just explain your story in such a way that it explains it, but you don't go in that traditional way. Which you think will be better?
Um, I want to say kind of like a hybrid. Maybe you don't have to go into a full introduction as a block of text, but maybe
Okay.
boil it down to some key points. But personally, I think it's important to have some sort of introduction or background on your poster for
Mhm.
your project. Otherwise, it might, it's for context too. So you want to have enough information, but think about ways that you can convey it in a shorter way. Though there's some
Mhm.
examples we'll come across here
Okay.
coming up to them. Just keep thinking of ideas of how you can communicate it in more succinct ways. So good
Thank
ideas
you.
and good suggestions. Yeah, I don't want to suggest something like too radical, and then maybe you might get some alarming feedback here. It's like, what is this giant tree in the middle of your poster for? Yeah. So, but Entomology Society of America, they have actually a section for infographics, for presenting your poster as an infographic now too. And some of those are really, artistic, with the insects and the diagrams of the insects, but it's also makes like their research organism makes sense for that to be on the posters.
So
All
there is
right.
one question that text, which we
Oh,
wanna,
yes,
yeah.
very good. Yes, of course, materials and methods and a flow chart. I think that's a great idea for instead of, reading a block of text where you've written and spelled out sentence by sentence, you can at a glance see your materials and methods in a flow chart. That's a great idea. All right. Anything else? And there's some more resources here on thinking about things like that. So we will go into that next, because our next section is communicating data. All right, this is interesting because it's some of our data is very challenging, but I'll just show you some examples here. But first, clearly show, the main purpose of that figure, that graph, or that data to your audience. Why are you putting this on your poster? Why do you want us, what are you trying to tell us? And why is it important? And so use things like labels, arrows, circle what you want us to look at, the text. It's maybe probably really hard for us to figure that out on our own unless we spend a lot of time at your poster. And this is, I've got links here and good suggestions and things like that. The title of the figure can be very informative, and maybe that's your key point. You see that on some figures, and it's always helpful for in communication. Look at the figure and the title of the figure. And then, of course, how you present the data is important, but that will depend on your data and on your research and what's appropriate for that data. So what I'll give here is just some tips. This is from this website. It says 3 things to consider when creating a graph. And I thought these were good. They're quite applicable to a lot of our research. And first of all is, do you need a graph? Maybe you can just tell us in a sentence or two, or use a table. It says if you have a lot of categories, a lot of measurements, maybe a table can be a succinct way to display it. Second is what types of variables you have. And of course, that will depend on your data and statistical analyses. You can look at what's conventional for other studies in your field, work with other advisors, colleagues on that. And then third, again, is going back to your key message. What is your key message? And include the data that will help communicate your message. So if you have a figure from another publication or something like that, that might have more, think about either revising that graphic or even blocking out. I heard a professor tell some students, well, just take little white boxes and cover up the data that you don't want to show. And that'll make it easier for the reader, if that's appropriate to not show that data. All right, so I'm going to put up some examples here of just some ways to put your data on a poster or a slide that'll help readability. So here's a pie chart. It's got three variables here, number of visits by device. So I'm going to look here, this larger blue sector is 56.8 desktop, 34 mobile, and then the smaller section is 9.1 tablet visits by device. Now, when we were doing that, our eye was going back and forth between this key and the chart. And that's a bit of effort for a reader, whether it's on a poster or even on paper. So you could think, well, you could label the graph directly. Here's that same data presented as a horizontal bar graph. And then look at the comparison and how much easier it is to see. This is from chartio.com, so I'm going to reference that. This is the horizontal bar graph and compared to a vertical bar graph. So you can see, some differences. Maybe you can decide on your preference or what you want to emphasize. So something as simple as that, changing the style of graph, but also putting or labeling, making it easy to see what point is what. If you have a lot of factors, a lot of variables, and a lot of our data, our studies do have a lot. It can be really hard to interpret in a pie graph. I've seen pie graphs look like this in seminars, and you could see it's really hard. Again, your eyes going back and forth, and it's just hard to remember and follow compared to this horizontal bar graph on the right. And depending on what you want to show, but it's then much easier to see what the differences are and what is clearing away. They're labeling the bars more easily directly. All right, so we have another example here. This is an example where I'm going to show from this source two different ways to present the data, and it made a difference. This is a graduation rate for bachelor's degree. And this is sort of a before example. They've got 3 bars, a black, dark purple, and a light purple. And that's hard to distinguish there. And then they've got these different categories here. This one, the small, there's obviously one group here. It says private for profit. That's a little bit smaller. All right, graduation rate. So they've repurposed it, or not repurposed it, but shown this in a different format here. And the title has their main point. Private for profit has a higher dropout rate. So you can immediately see that main message. And then they've taken that key piece of data that they want people to look at, and they've made it a different color and actually labeled it directly. They've also simplified it, where here they had male and female and total enrollment. They've just put the total enrollment because there wasn't enough differences, and the total enrollment in this second graph conveys the information adequately. Here's another example where just taking the same graph and labeling it a little differently can really help readability. This is frequency of students, and then I've just taken this graph and labeled it. And I did this, so I made up this title, but you can put the main message in your title. And then I'm put the labels for each line right next to the line. And then the y-axis is horizontal print or horizontally oriented. So if you go side by side, before and after, it's easier to get the main message, and then your eye doesn't have to go back and forth, and you can see right away this upper line is full-time, this lower line, you can see what that is. So those are some small changes that can help the readability, especially on screen or on a poster. So going back to that 90% of info transmitted to the brain is visual, I did want to stop and include things like icons. Use of icons can add color and help bring attention to certain points. From our planning group, this was a good resource that came on biorender.com. They have an icon library of science icons and science ways to create science figures. But if you have other good sources, especially if they're free or if they're small charge, put them in the chat. I've even gotten some graphics. They were actually people graphics icons, but I wanted more diversity in the people, so I got them off of Etsy, the business site ETSY, and for just a few dollars, I can download graphics, and then I was able to just change the colors and things like that. All right, so I also want to, this is some good ideas here. Visual articles, or if you also call visual abstracts or graphical abstracts, are just ways to take writing and make it visual. And that's, I think, what we've been starting to brainstorm about. And so you see that if you do a Google search, you'll find things like that, especially if you do scientific, look for scientific abstracts. The medical community has quite a few. I found quite a few from the Journal of the American Medical Association. So here's an example of what is on this website. This is a study, but you can see a whole study that's just the nuts and bolts, but the information is there. Population, settings, intervention, primary outcome, the findings, and the effects. And at a glance, you can have quite a few conversations about this, but there's not a lot of text. It's easy to read and easy to skim. Now, this is from an article. But if you go to the article, this is also at the top. Key points, question, finding, and meaning. So you can envision incorporating this on a poster as well as a summary. And I will add that it is an advanced skill to be able to summarize a lot of information into something like this. It takes a lot of editing, planning, and thought and feedback. They also, on this same article, have their abstract at the top listed with these headings like importance, objective, the design setting and participants. So, and then they're using white space to divide their abstract, which is often a long paragraph, into shorter paragraphs with these headings. So this is a lot more readable, especially on a poster, and at a glance you can see a lot, gain a lot of information about this study. So there's some elements here you can use and incorporate, perhaps in your own poster. And then this is a source of a lot of good ideas here. We mentioned flow charts, timelines, if that's appropriate, or a list. And this is the link here for the infographic. It's really an infographic with links to more information. Here's that map that was referenced, especially if that's relevant to your study. That can put a lot of important context, because likely a lot of your visitors to the poster may not be so familiar with some of the areas. And it just, when you know where it is and put that, especially if in relation to maybe geography or site or distance, it can really help explain a lot. So there's more there on the infographic. On infographics, you can search for that, but that is, I'll provide the link there in the study. All right, and so I'm going to pause there again for any questions or comments. And I see, what is the recommended font size for labels in the graph? Now going with, that's a good question. If the minimum for text is about 24, I wouldn't go below 18, but there's no hard and fast rule. I wouldn't make it too tiny though. Excuse me, anybody else have any suggestions on how they're labeling?
Yeah, I've tried to stay above 24, but I've looked, I kind of seen what it looks like at 20 and 18, and I try to, like, rather than go smaller, see what information I could possibly take out to try to get down. But
yeah, that's a good I once was an attendee at a poster and conference, and it was a figure that the font was really tiny, and it was somebody I knew. So I said, this is really hard to read. I might have been like under 10 point font. So this is pretty hard. You can make this figure larger in your letters, your text larger. And apparently I wasn't the first person that said this to this student. So people notice that if it's too small, it's just hard to read.
Looks like Adenika has another question. Is it a must to cite articles in a poster? If it is, must I list the references? I was also wondering this too, actually.
Yeah, I tend to think so, or I think it could be really helpful. Now, the literature cited can be tiny font because that doesn't have to be large. Or you can you can even add a QR code to a Google Doc or someplace where it's at. But even if it's you abbreviate or shorten the reference to a line, the abbreviation for, first author et al, and then the abbreviation for the journal, and then the year and the day, and then make that smaller. That can be small font too, actually, if it's readable there too. But I would put the literature's, the references on the slide. Is that the question there? Cite articles in the poster. You should cite things, you should credit things too. Whether or not you list the references, you might not have to list it like you do in a paper that long, because I know that does take up a lot of space. So that can be one way you can save some space if you think it's important that your readers see what you're citing as well. You can just make that smaller, or like I said, put a link, put a QR code somewhere where people can find it.
That's a brilliant idea with the QR code. I've never thought of that before, but totally going to try that soon, sometime in the future.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that more and more, and people can use their phones and get to it, and then they've got that on their phones for future reference too.
Thank you. Now, this might just be a comment, but I saw you putting BioRender as like a website to go to. I just downloaded, I just got a free trial the other day and I'm loving it. So definitely recommend BioRender too.
Yeah, there's some things there you don't find anywhere else, and it's like scientific stuff. So yeah.
Easy to make figures with BioRender. Yeah.
So thank you. All right, so we'll go on just to wrap up here. It is important to get feedback. You'll see a lot of things that you can change or edit to make it even better. I always recommend printing out the poster just on regular printer, letter paper, to look at it, because you'll see things on the paper that you may miss on the screen before you send it to print. But it's also helpful to gather feedback from people that might be unfamiliar with your research and say, do you understand this? Or what questions do you have? And you might be surprised that there might be some obvious questions that are really important to understanding, but since you know it so well, you may not have added or included that too. And these questions are clues to areas that might need more explanation. So the feedback is important. So that means planning ahead so you have time to gather and incorporate the feedback. And then again throughout, but at the end, as you're wrapping and finalizing things, review the content, make sure that your core message, everything is strong and supporting your core message here. And with that, I'll stop here and take any more questions if they have any.
All right.
But thanks for everybody, this group, for coming. We have a nice sized group here for this evening.
Thank you so much for coming and presenting to us here today. I'm definitely going to have to try out some of those tips and tricks that you mentioned, especially the QR codes. So Thank you very much. And we will have the Zoom recording posted soon on our ScabNet page. And there's also a newsletter that the U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative puts out. And this will definitely be included. I believe Amber writes those up. So people can see and more people can gain from this presentation. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And if you've never made a QR code, just Google it, how to make a QR code. And there's sites where you can enter the website that you're linking to, and then it'll give you the QR code that you can just copy and paste onto your poster.
Okay. Yeah, I had the same question. I was wondering that actually. That's what I was going to do, but thank you.
Yeah, just Google it. Yeah, there's a lot of QR code generators out there.
Not as the techie as the normal individual, but I think I can figure it out. Thank you.
I have just a little question, Monica. Thank you again for the presentation. What's your take about adding some picture, the picture of the speaker in the poster?
Oh, I like that when people do that. I think that is, it helps people. It's good for exposure, so people know who you are. So, I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I
All
think
right.
I think it's I think it's getting to that point at the end of the day. I think we all appreciate you having you here presenting to us, and I hope to see you again sometime in the future, and have a great evening. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining in and for your input and ideas here.
Thank you, Monica.
All right.
Thank you, Monica.
All right. Bye.